Welcome, everybody, to Smart AF. I am your host, Erica Seatsma, founder and CEO of Autofluencer. And joining me today is Ian Brightman. He is the co-founder and CEO of Pitlane Media and Marketing. Welcome, Ian.
Thanks for having me, Erica.
Ian and I recently got to chat and meet via social media. Who would have ever thought? It was a really great conversation that I think with everything going on right now with, some economic uncertainty, depending on what side of the industry you're on, we're kind of seeing it from all fronts. We're seeing budgets tighten down. We're seeing people just not sure, right? Ian and I got on this great conversation, as someone who's kind of been in the industry. He's been there, done that. He's, weathered COVID, weathered different economic downturns and seen, those that have made the most of it and those that maybe turtled before they should have. So today's conversation is all about, when there are tough times, do you put your foot on the brakes or do you step on the gas? So, Ian, why don't you share a little bit first on kind of what you all do at Pitlane Media and Marketing, and kind of a little bit of your background so the audience can kind of center themselves from where you're speaking and get your POV.
Well, my team and I are in the automotive, motorsport, and aftermarket industries. It's kind of three separate industries, but it's all inclusive at certain levels of all of those industries. We cover content creation for events, for trade shows, for commercials, for OEMs as well, not just, the aftermarkets and enthusiast brands, but, the actual manufacturers. And then we've also done, all the marketing and advertising for a number of different brands. Most of those were all in the enthusiast and aftermarket, not the OEMs, just because they're a much larger piece of the pie.
I've been there, done that, had the OEMs as clients, and good on those that do it, but not me. I'm out of that. Yeah. I'm out of that game.
I give full kudos to specifically the advertising agencies that the OEMs use, because their prompts, not AI prompts, but like the directive prompts that the OEMs give to the agencies of, here's kind of what we're thinking. And then the agencies just run with it to create some of the most iconic and fantastic ads. They're fantastic.
So let's talk a little bit about, what you're seeing in the market and kind of your advice, right? If you're talking to a brand, you're at an event, you're at a trade show, and you're talking to someone and this question of when times get tough, do I step on the gas when it comes to advertising and marketing, especially in our space? We talked about this a little bit. A lot of these companies are run by either engineers who marketing was a really part of the curriculum. Marketing, advertising, top funnel. I see top funnel is very confusing to the linear engineer mindset. They make amazing products, but top funnel gets real confusing real fast. And it can be seen as superfluous. And then, or private equity. Not a lot in between, right? You tend to see every now and then you'll see a family member take over who has a more well-rounded background because they came up through the business, not always through engineering. But a lot of times it's either like engineering or private equity, and neither of which are big fans of awareness, branding, high quality imagery. So, when people are looking at this concept and these line items, what is your advice there?
Well, I think regarding like the not seeing the value, I think it's more so in the private equity line. They don't really see it. With engineers. They'll see the value if the agency or if the marketing personnel in their internal team understands how to show them how content has a marketing value. It's not about, oh, this picture is so cool. It's about where is it going? What's it going to be used for? How is it going to convert? It's about creating a value from a visual. So private equities don't really, at least from the conversations I've had with the very few that I have met along the way, they don't really get that because they don't, as you said, they don't really care. And engineering minds, they care once they see that value.
Right.
But it's up to the team to show them how that works. Regarding like our kind of like where we're at, I think it really just depends on, the mindset of not just, any agency that these companies are using, but what the companies kind of want to do in the current spectrum of the world. Do they want to play defense where their main purpose is to survive the next 6 to 12 months? Or is it to go on offense where they end up owning the next 2 to 5 years while everyone else is making panic decisions. It really, which direction they go is going to alter a lot of their next month to 3 months of choices.
Right. And I think that's right. It's the short game versus the long game. And it's tough because the long game is certainly a gamble. You don't really know. But I love the example. Share a little bit of the example of your real world experience with those who, you saw people who decide to play the short game. We're just going to survive. We're going to turtle. We're going to just keep our heads down and keep budgets really low and just survive, turn everything off. And where, yeah, I'll let you tell the story. I don't want to talk. You tell the
No
story.
worries.
It's a
Yeah.
great story. I think it really helps it's a perspective.
Yeah, before I was in the automotive and motorsport world, I was always a car guy, but my jobs in marketing were in the film industry for direct to consumer companies in that area who were catering to pro filmmakers, indie filmmakers, content creators wanting to be filmmakers. That whole boom of content creation from 2019 to 2023, 24.
Right.
That was like my kind of area and my zone for 3 different companies. At the start and arguably the height of COVID in mid to late 2020, I was with a company called Aperture, which is at the time, it was a high-end lighting company that was, we had 4 or 5 different competitors all vying for the same spot, and then all trying to get the same like content creators to make videos and on and on and on. And at the time, COVID had literally just started, at least in North America, of shutting everything down, all the masks, all of the testings, all the swabs, all of everything. And so everyone's lifestyle got turned inside out. And the company did a really smart thing. And we, at the time, did not fire anyone. We didn't shorten anyone's hours. We actually, during that time, we hired something like 6 or 7 people. And we doubled down on marketing efforts, knowing that in that space, we were one of the few that actually had like a US headquarters. All of the rest at that time were overseas. So we took advantage of knowing this, or at the time, that market, and doubled down on every single marketing effort. We got more people in the community department. We got more people in the marketing, more in the advertising, like everywhere across the board, across the world. That solidified the next 3 years of how the company was viewed, because our competitors were making panic decisions. They were in survival mode. And don't get me wrong, our profits did not jump through the roof. If anything, we just did a great job at surviving. But after that time of the height of COVID and the height of scare and panic and everything, Aperture, the name, became even more synonymous with high-end lighting that was affordable for the entire market.
Right.
That very little had to be done to keep it at that level, while every one of our competitors were now playing catch up after the height had dropped.
I mean, that's such a great point, right? I mean, in this sense that you guys were the ones, you were dictating the conversation. There was no one else to get in the conversation. They were all pulling back and pulling out of the conversation. And I think sometimes what people fail to understand is awareness, branding, top level. You mentioned community. So for the listeners, will you explain real quick what community managers are? That is working with
the community. Yeah, the community department in most companies is kind of the bridge between like PR, crisis management, like social, as well as branding and marketing. They're kind of like a middle ground of all of them, and depending on the company, it is a part of all of those meetings, or it's just kind of there.
Right. A lot of times it's audience management. And then also we see a lot community, what'll fall in there is ambassadors, content creators, right? Because they're helping build the community. And I think in motorsports, in aftermarket, the communities are massive. The conversations what a great space to be in, right? The conversations are always happening, right? Even if people aren't able to buy indiscriminately, this industry certainly had a bit of a inverted curve during the pandemic, thanks to the stimulus checks and things like that. People instead of saving, man, they spend it on their car. Like you saw a lot of companies in this space had these weird spikes, right? Where, things like movies were doing terrible, so we saw this. People getting the offer, the overlanding spaces did amazing and really launched on the scene. I think overland really solidified itself as like, we are our own category during that time. So it's this really interesting time. But if you think about it, kind of like we're saying, like when we think about the community, all these conversations that are happening, and that kind of was along the creator rise, right? A lot of people started working on cars during COVID, and it brought kind of fresh voices and fresh conversations and fresh communities into the space. And I think that if you stop those conversations, if you don't have a plan around those conversations, and through what you all do, from a Pitlane perspective, with your media, with your marketing, you're really helping drive those conversations, right? You're helping set the narrative. You're helping set a little bit to what you're saying. That visual aesthetic drives conversation, right? That dictates narrative, the level of visual aesthetic that you can bring to the table, the level of storytelling that we talked a little bit about this, that you all can bring to the table, help set that narrative and all those conversations that are happening, and you pull back, you're no longer in those conversations.
The funny thing is about like this community, just like car culture as a whole, as all encompassing as you can kind of, put it without, naming 7 different industries that are in one. The car culture community is as much as they buy, for emotion, for little trinkets here and there, like consumers across the board, the community of enthusiasts and car cultures is a community that if you're a part of it, you understand that you don't really have to market that strongly because the community does it for you. It's not that it's like closed off, but once you're in, you're a part of it no matter what you do, no matter who you talk with, no matter what religion or political spectrum anyone is a part of, you are a part of a community there. And it can, these people, myself included, we go through hours, days, sometimes weeks of research, and we don't buy something that's like $6-7 grand off of a whim.
Right.
I mean, maybe some
Off
of us do, but most of
ad
us
on
do
Facebook,
not.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Like those are helpful, but really like Facebook ads for like higher tier, let's just say like high tier suspension. Very few people are going to buy those off of the direct Facebook ad. But what that would do is send them to the website that then, their cookie data in the back end is going to get distributed into, the website's back end and go, okay, cool. Now we're going to retarget with an email and we're going to retarget with a Google ad. And now it's less about making them buy off of any of the ads, but it's about putting that name into their minds so often that they become a part of the conversation with the community. So like even these high tier ads, they're not necessarily meant to make the purchase there. If it happens, cool. But it's meant to like ingrain that company or that product into the community's conversation. And then it's there for months.
I want to talk a little bit about, in some cases, financially, like, right? Like, let's say someone's partnering with an agency like a Pitlane, they've got a partner, but money is tight, right? And they are like, there is a numbers game. I think some people think, oh, I have to cut the expense entirely. It's all or nothing, right? This kind of like, they don't even think to come to their partners and be like, hey, look, we've got to cut down budgets. I know during COVID, my last company, we went to all of our vendors and we were like, our clients at the time were car dealers and they literally had to shut their door. Some could stay open for essential services on the service side, but like, it was a quirky, weird time. I mean, you had companies that had been in business for 100 years having to furlough their entire staff, right? Because they had nowhere for them to go. Certainly a time we were feeling at my old company and we would reach out to our vendors and say, how can you work with us? Right. And I think that's something people don't think of or realize that they can do. They can have that conversation. And I think, talk a little bit about when times are tough, the benefit of having a partner versus not having a partner at all.
I mean, a lot of that comes into, it's less about do they need an agency? I'm actually in the process of writing that article. It's more about having like someone on the outside who's able to tell them what they're doing is incorrect. Not that they're like dumb or they don't know what they're doing or anything like that. It's more of a conversation of when you're inside, when you're especially like founders, and I'm guilty of it too. The decisions that founders make is usually emotional based. It's not from a purely data standpoint, and that's just because it's your baby. And
Yeah.
I've been guilty of it with Pitlane
Yeah.
branding.
Guilty. Yeah.
I've had to have some of my team members just completely tear apart a design that I did because I felt like I had a better viewpoint, and they just obliterated it because I didn't have the emotional distance that was necessary to make the right decision for the company. The same thing happens all the time. So it's not necessarily an issue of, oh, we have to like pay for them to handle X, Y, and Z. It's, are they able to make a decision? If they're a true partner as an
Right.
agency, and don't get me wrong, that is rare. It shouldn't be, but it is. Where the agency actually looks after its clients and does things for the right reasons and not just to keep the money flowing. When it's done right and there's a true collaboration on everything, and there's a great back and forth between an agency and a company, the decision to cut things back is less fearful. You can have that conversation because it's an open discourse of, okay, I, as a founder, this is my fear. This is what's happening in the world right now, and this is how it's affecting me. And the outside source, the agency, or even just like a consultant, whoever it is able to, look at your books, look at your whole spectrum, understand the data and the story that is telling the company, the founder, and go, okay, I can see where you're going with all of this, but that might not be the right decision. Maybe we cut back certain efforts because if we look at, the numbers, it's not as high as a conversion priority for you. And maybe that's not even the direction you want to go in. We've just been doing it because it still makes you money. But now, since it's going to cost more, and so there's a worse margin for you, maybe we just cut that effort and take the money that was going over there and put it over here where you have maybe you don't have a better conversion rate, but maybe your margin is much higher over here. It's just about seeing the small points to make up the big picture instead of making decisions off of the large picture without really looking at the details. That's, at least from my view, that's what it seems like a lot of those decisions are based on.
I mean, I couldn't agree more in the sense that having that partner brings just an outside level of expertise. And to your point, that's why you need good partners, right partners. I will say those that are focused solely on our industry, that are truly focused in automotive, I think are better at being true partners. Every now and again, I hear of someone that's working with an agency that's not within this space. And that's where you're going to find the content's a little more generic. The ads are a little more generic. You kind of start to lose some of the care. You learn and you lose the expertise of how to approach the industry and how to innovate in the industry and how to innovate. Because at the end of the day, if you're a car person, you intimately know the consumer. You know that community. You know that audience. You know that, whereas an outside agency won't have that same context. And like we were saying, it's a very different consumer when it comes to this purchase decision. Especially because you do tend to have much, there's not a ton of products that are sub a few $100s, right? Like, when you're really working on a build, when you're working on a race car, even the commodity products on a standalone might be cheap, but you're trying to fund a whole season, right? And so then that gets a lot more expensive. So, I think that's a great point on, looking to that partner for expertise. You can cut things back. They can scale things back and make something work for that budget. But I would just be so cautious of just swinging the axe and taking the whole part out, right? And to your point, unless there was a problem in the partnership, but that conversation should have happened months before, you should have a partner you feel comfortable having that conversation, right? Like that's a different kind of topic. To kind of recap, as we talk about this, and for those that are facing these decisions and budget decisions, there's a lot that have been going through their budget. I know some are still going through budgets. Budgets are quickly shifting. The war has added a whole new layer when it comes to transportation with the fuel prices. If you have shipping, if you have, that's getting really interesting really fast.
Yep.
Supply chains are getting disrupted right now. So as you're thinking through kind of the totality, right, of what you're having to face, before you swing the axe, before you put that foot on the gas of all your marketing efforts, I love the way you said that, Ian. Is this the opportunity to go on offense, right? What are
Yeah.
your competitors going to do? And it's not just outlasting them in this space. Is it outpacing them? Is it taking over the narrative during this time? And I think for some smaller, nimble companies that have good partners, that have creativity, that, a partner also helps innovate. And a partner that knows your market can innovate much better than your team who's dealing with all the stress of, I've very rarely met a marketing person in our industry that isn't also planning all the events, that isn't also like doing 3 other jobs. So when you're having to deal with all the tactical day in and day out, it's hard to get creative. It's hard to get innovative, right? And so, having
It
that kind of
definitely can
partnership.
be.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think to your point of, especially like looking at possibly what are your competitors doing, and before you swing that axe, really understand the spot that you're in. There's a company that just at the end, I think in Q4 of 25, they announced that they were going under. Koru Works, Koru Works,
Yeah.
and a huge enthusiast brand, massive in the drift scene. They, I think they had 2 pro spec drifters and 1 pro drifter under their name, and always doing like grid life stuff and fuel fest, hyperfest. Like they're everywhere in the drift scene, or they were. And Greg there, I forget what his title was, but he was essentially like the face of the company. But I know he also handled a lot of their marketing. He, in their video, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember exactly what all their numbers were, but he essentially akined everything to, or pointed everything to, if they get a line item wrong pre-shipping, before like all the customs and the tariffs and everything, then their normal margin of like maybe 15% suddenly became like 3%, because
Right.
they weren't aware of how many things had shifted on the back end for a company that they don't control, that
Right.
they're just a distributor for. People are taking their orders through Koru Works, and now they're making even less money on something they already made very little money on. And obviously I was not aware of like their entire back end, but Greg and I had talked a couple of times about specific things over the years. He did let me know that like they were struggling. Obviously I was on the outside. There was only so much information that he could give me, let alone, because we weren't business partners, what he wanted to give me. So I don't know what their direct competitors' plans were. I can see what they are doing on the front end, and they're doing a good job. Someone like CorrWorks, from an outside perspective in marketing and creative, I look at it as, okay, maybe you just don't sponsor 3 drivers in Formula Drift and you go a little harder into the enthusiast side, since that's where your customers are. I didn't see their back end, so maybe that was actually wrong. But like small tweaks here and there that look like large decisions can pave the way for you to, 1, stay alive, or 2, no longer be on defense, but now take it to your competitors and essentially run that whole space.
For sure.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
It's very interesting. Giving us a lot to think about, Ian. So just as a quick takeaway, what's your quick kind of recap to any brand watching this that is making some of these decisions? What's your advice to them?
You don't necessarily have to go get an agency or an outside person, but you should probably get someone who is not as emotionally invested in every single decision as you are, so that they can try and help you see something that maybe you're not able to see because you don't have the distance to make that decision. That's probably number 1, is an emotional distance.
Right. And some of the experience.
That helps.
A low-level person can help execute, but if they don't have the strategy, especially in tough times, in easy times, you can put anybody on it. in the tough times is when you really need someone with experience. So if you're going to do it, get someone who knows what they're doing.
And it's not exactly they have to know every step of the way, but they have to know the right questions to ask to get the right information.
Yeah.
If someone's just there being a yes man and taking all of your input, they're not really strategizing, they're implementing your strategy. And that's not exactly why you need them.
Perfect. Well, great advice to leave us on, Ian. Thank you so much for being on Smart AF, and we will talk to you all soon.
Cool. Thanks for having me.